Good evening. I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting, the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung and Bunurong Bun Wurrung peoples of the East Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Wominjeka, Kalosirtate. Welcome to the annual John Berger Memorial Lecture, a project that we started here at the Greek community last year. And I want to thank my board for all their support, for supporting this event going forward. The aim of this lecture is to use art and or the arts to reorientate our thinking on a broad range of issues. We hope to expand this project in the future. Nikos will speak on how this relates to the central tenets of John's work. First up tonight, we have a video presentation by Katya Berger, John's daughter, who incidentally recorded this a few days ago. Katya is a film and theatre critic in Geneva, daughter of John and Anya Bostock, who was a famous translator of Brecht, Lucas and Benjamin. John's daughter, who incidentally recorded this a few days ago. Katya is a film and theatre critic in Geneva, daughter of John and Anya Bostock, who was a famous translator. That's good. Okay, that's good. All right. That was good. That's right. Where was I? She married Orestes Andriadakis, and they lived for a while in Athens, where her daughter Chloe was born. She's written a number of books with John, one of which was Tisian Nymph and Shepherd. It's a series of letters between father and daughter, which acts as a vehicle of insights into the everyday life and art of the great Venetian master. Katya, welcome from Melbourne. The floor is yours.
Hello, readers of my father gathered in a country where no Bergers ever set a foot. Does that matter? Not a bit. Place and time don't matter that much. What does count is our experience of both and our attempts to name that experience. It's the shoe that counts. I've been to many places with John in many different times of our lives. Kitchens, hills, museums, seasides, trains, churches, hospitals. Yet even those I can still remember now seem hazy to me. Not unlike the environment where I imagine John today, amongst all the dead. A faraway country works in a similar way. In one's imagination, anyone can meet there, including people who don't know each other. And look, our digital world is making this idea true at this very moment. So, Behrouz, Hoda, friends I don't know, may your voices carry your experiences all the way across to us all, whether here or there, now or then, blurred or distinct. I'm Katya, by the way, John's daughter, sending greetings from Geneva, Switzerland.
I hadn't seen that before, but Nikos, you're right, that was truly moving. And thank you, Katya, for the introduction. We hope to see you in Melbourne one day. I'm sure our guests tonight don't really need any introduction, but for completeness, Here goes. First off, Nikos Papasteriadis is known to us all. He's the director of the Research Unit in Public Culture and a professor in the School of Culture and Communication at the University of Melbourne. Nikos is the founder, with Professor Scott Maguire, who's in the audience tonight, of the Spatial Aesthetics Research Cluster, and is the project leader of the Australian Research Council Linkage Project, Large Screens, and the Transnational Public Sphere. He's also chief investigator of the ARC Discovery Project, Public Screens, the Transformation of Public Space. Educated at the Universities of Melbourne and Cambridge, previously the Deputy Director of the Australia Centre at Melbourne University, Head of the Centre of Ideas at the VCA, Lecturer in Sociology, and recipient of the Simon Fellowship at the University of Manchester. Hoda, as for her, was born in Tehran and now based in Melbourne. She completed a bachelor's degree in fine art photography in Tehran and a PhD thesis in creative arts at Curtin University. Hoda began her career as a documentary photographer in Iran and in 2005 and has been living in Australia since 2007, where she practices as a visual artist and lectures in photography and fine art. Hoda's work has been widely exhibited both locally and internationally. In 2021, her first monograph, Speak the Wind, was published by Mac in London. She has her work in numerous private and public collections. Throughout her career, Hoda has been shortlisted for many prestigious art awards, and in 2015 won Australia's National Photographic Portrait Prize. In 2018, the Bowness Photography Prize from the Monash Gallery of Art, and in 2021, People's Choice Awards of the Ramsay Art Prize at the Gallery of South Australia. Selected as one of the top 8 young artists to exhibit at Primavera 2018 at the MCA in Sydney. She is represented by Milani Galleries in Brisbane. Last but not least, Behrouz Boochani. Welcome to Melbourne for the first time. And I believe this is your first speaking engagement that you've had in Australia as live. This meeting has been a long time coming. It was in this very room, we could only see you on this big screen a number of years ago, waiting for that day that you would visit us in person. Well, with the incredible help of Hoda and Nikos and many others, that day has finally arrived. Behrouz is a graduate from, I better get these right, Tarbet, Morades and Moallem universities in Tehran. The latter one he obtained a master's degree in political science, political geography and geopolitics. He's described as a Kurdish-Iranian journalist, human rights defender, writer, film producer, now living in New Zealand, granted refugee status in July 2020. His memoir, No Friend But the Mountains, Writing from Manus Prison, won the Victorian Prize for Literature and also the Prize for Non-Fiction in 2018. Welcome to all of you.
Nice and comfortable here. Hello, Behrouz again, and Hoda. What an honor to be in your company, in the flesh. And Katya made the comment that no Berger has set foot in this country. But it's not 100% true, because during her Christmas lunches, is that meant to be going up? Because we need to show Hoda's... It's going to come down again, okay. Like I was saying, no Berger has set foot in this country and technology is my friend. And but Katya didn't mention that her uncle, who she would sit on his knee every Christmas and bounce on it, was Gus Nossel, our most famous medical researcher in this country. So she has a relative here who couldn't come, unfortunately, but he sends his greetings. And I met Katya at Geneva Airport in 1991. This was, John had taken her to the airport to meet another Greek man, because she had recently met Oresti Andriadakis, at the Cannes Film Festival. And John was relieved that a Greek man had liberated her from the repressed Swiss boyfriend. So Katya and Orest lived for a brief period in Athens, and they enjoyed a very complex and rich life, and one thing for sure, it was not repressed. But this was also the first occasion that I met John in the flesh at the airport with Katya. And we then went back to his village. And on the morning of the second day, he came down for breakfast wearing this white flannel night dress and these tartan slippers which were too big for his feet. And he was shuffling rather nervously around the kitchen and started hovering above me. And then he leaned over and says, "Nikos, do you have any questions for me?" I said, "John, I've read all your books, all your articles. I've even read all the interviews you've given in public. And I've even read all the reviews that have been written about you. I don't think I need to learn anything new." And he went, "Oh, thank God." And he threw his arms in the air and he said, "Let's put the flag of freedom up now." And he felt liberated by that. He hated talking about himself. And the interesting thing that when John did do interviews, he never said the same thing twice. I believe this is also true about the man I'm about to interview. He never said the same thing twice because he was always thinking what was new in the question. So it gave him the opportunity to go forward or to reflect differently about the present than to self-evaluate his own past or let alone determine the legacy of his own work. Nothing would have been more alien to him, more repugnant to him than to think and talk about himself. He'd rather be sitting in Jim's dental chair than talking about himself. So it's in that way that we are talking about this lecture series, not as a way to monumentalize John Berger or to, evaluate him and elevate him and put him on a legacy, because that would actually make him jump out of his grave. He would become deliriously angry. Like when I showed him this book that we were doing once with Merrin Gates at National University about what John Berger saw. He goes, "Don't you have anything better to do in Australia than talk about me?" I said, "It's not about you, John. It's from you and what we can connect through you." And it's in that sense that I want to use John Berger as a platform for us. This is my first question to Hoda and to Behrouz. The question is, in what way do you think John's work still touches you today? And what is relevant in him today? And how do you think it takes you to places you would otherwise not go? Behrouz, would you like to start?
Thank you very much. So, that works now? Yes. Yeah. It is really a great honor to be here. So it is the first.
Maybe a little bit closer.
It is the first time I speak in Australia. Actually, I haven't read his works, to be honest, because I'm not sure that his works translated to Farsi or not, because my problem is I cannot read English well. But I did search about him and I read articles about his work. But what is important in this, case or in this context is that connection that you said, and so of course it's a great honor to be here and in this platform which is connected to John Berger. And what I know about his works is about marginalized people or people who are resisting against power structure or against system everywhere is very related to his work. So that's why I think we are here and you invited us.
Yes.
But it's just, I can't say that it's great honor to be here.
Thanks, Behrouz. Thanks, Nikos. It's very exciting to be sitting here and with Behrouz in person. As you know, we did a presentation here a few years ago when Behrouz was on Manus Island, and I did travel around the country and overseas presenting on the screen with him. And it's the first time sitting together. No, it's actually the second time. When you arrived in New Zealand, I was there. So it's really exciting to be in Australia together. For me, I think, for those of you who know, I'm a photographer and filmmaker, so it's clear what John Berger means to an image maker and what impact he's had on the way that we see the world today. And my first introduction to his writing was through the ways of seeing and his videos, and then I became obsessed and read more and more. And I have to say that I'm greatly influenced by his writings on the ways of seeing and photography in general. And I keep returning to his writing. It's like a Bible for any photographer. And also, like I was saying before to Nikos, that the day that he passed away, I remember I felt that great sadness. We all did. And I went for a walk, and I decided to go into the first bookshop I find and buy a book of John Berger and read it. And I found a book which is "And Our Faces, My Heart, Brief as Photos." And I saw the photos. I was like, yes, that's for me. He sent it for me. And it was like one copy in an old bookshop on Burke Street. And in Iran, we often, when we love a book, we tend to, especially the poetry, we hold it close to our hearts, and we're like, come on, send me a message, and we open it. And whatever comes, you open the page and read it. That's like a message to you from the poet or the universe. And I opened the book, and that book especially is like small, brief writings that he treated writing like a photograph. And each paragraph is like a photograph. And the page that I opened was the most beautiful, romantic description of death, which was quite amazing to me. I felt like it's like a message from him to me speaking. So that's my connection to John Berger. And through you and your writing on him, and also, yeah, I listened to your lecture last year on John Berger here, and it was amazing, and it's an honor to be here today on this platform.
That's a truly beautiful book that you chose to connect with. He wrote it as a series of love letters to Nella, who's partner in Paris when he first met her. And it was mostly written on the way to or from the train station.
Wow.
That's why it was all little paragraphs and vignettes in that sense.
It's incredible.
So
it's like a photograph.
It's
yeah.
little snapshots, as you say. But let's zoom back to 2018 when we first met here. And Behrouz, you were in Manus Island. And you zoomed in to us on your phone, and we could see the background a little bit, and we could see the difficulties in your situation a little bit, just a glimpse. We had the privilege of being in this room to talk about you, and we had the luxury of some of your very good friends who can't, like Arnold Zabel, who was someone who campaigned for you and wrote on your behalf before and has continued afterwards. He's been a great advocate of the disenfranchised, as you said. And Janet Galbraith, who was here then at that time. She was really a co-organizer of that event. At that time, the minister, Peter Dutton, he said, "This man will never set foot on this country." Well, you're here now. What sort of victory do you feel in just arriving?
I should mention that still I have a challenge with this. So Peter Dutton and Australian politicians, they never recognized us as a human being, because even in that case, even when I arrived in New Zealand, he called me an individual. So they never mentioned my name, my actual name. even the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, on TV, and Scott Morrison, Peter Dutton, they never mention my name. They just refer to me as just an individual, or so that shows their mentality. But I was sure actually that if I want to visit Australia or go to Australia, definitely I will do it one day. And the reason I was sure, I was confident, is because I believed in writing and power of writing. And politicians, they are not powerful. So it's not a slogan that what I say, I believe in that. And I was sure that will happen if I want. So now I wanted, and I am here.
Thank you for maintaining that. I'm going to ask Hoda to come in, but as you were speaking then, you were talking about the power of writing. I want to acknowledge another poet, Antigone Kefala, who was a legend in this country, and she passed away on Saturday. And she was a very beautiful poet. She wrote a book called The Aliens, and in that book there's a sentence, "In dreams begins the journey." Hoda, you met, I think, for the first time when you went to Manus Island. You met Behrouz in Manus Island in 2018. You did the series of photographs, you did a collaboration, you did sound pieces, you did videos with Behrouz. Can you talk us through some of the process of the collaboration, and maybe even show us some of the images? This is a cue for the...
Sure. I just want to say that we knew that we've been waiting for your visa for quite a while now, and it took months, right? And the day that the visa arrived, Behrouz called me and he said, "The war is over, I'm coming." And we always talked about it, that this journey will not be completed without you finally coming here to break that message that you will never ever set foot on the Australian soil. And tomorrow morning you're going to be on ABC breakfast.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Hopefully, and that will be a message to the politicians as well. I met Behrouz, yes, in 2000. We started talking in 2017. I remember when the Australian government closed the detention centre after 4.5 years on Manus, and announced that they will be sending the refugees to new facilities indefinitely. And that's when the news was on TV that I knew of Behrouz's writing, and I was following his writing. And you wrote something for the Saturday paper, I think was a manifesto from Manus Island, and I read it and I was like, Persian poetry, and I didn't know Kurdish poetry back then. I associated it with Persian. It was all over it, and it was so moving and touching, and I was following his writing. But when I remember seeing him on television during those protests, and he was speaking to the Australian people, asking them to do something about the situation, and I was shaken by that footage. And thank you so much. And what was going on there, I couldn't believe that the Australian public is not doing anything about this, because it was basically the most inhumane treatment of refugees I've ever seen in my whole life. So at that point I felt quite restless and thought that I should do whatever I can, because I knew Behrouz's language, and I was like, I'm an artist and I have a small platform, maybe I can do something. And I've managed to find his contacts, and we got in touch and we bonded immediately. And you said, I was waiting for an artist to come to Manus for 5 years, so maybe wait, I should educate you about the history of this place. And this is the man. We exchanged voice messages, like I think thousands of voice messages every day, and Behrouz was sharing with me the first chapters of his writings for the book. And after 5 months of talking, he was like, I think you're ready and you can come. But we had to kind of plan a trip around, the regulations. I knew I can't go there if I ask for a visa as a photographer to go to Manus, so we lied to the authorities about my intentions. I said I'm a tourist. And anyway, on the day that I arrived, I remember 5 months of talking. I felt like I know him really well, but you were on the other side of the fences with a local man who was helping us. And yeah, we started talking straight away for 10 hours. We were just drinking tea and date outside and just talking. And we planned a whole trip for 9 days. And Behrouz helped me to get 6 men every day outside of the camp. And there were a group of locals helping us. And we were going to another island near Manus, making food and talking and chatting and sharing histories. That's on the left, Behrouz's best friends, the team of Kurdish, cast and crew helping me with the whole setup. And this is the island of Robin, the fisherman who was hosting us, and we were basically, they helped us set up a studio in the island. We couldn't work on Manus. We were being monitored the whole time by the immigration officers. And this is, for example, them digging holes and setting up poles and making a studio. I had this black fabric with me. I knew I wanted to use as a backdrop for the portraits. This is Behrouz on the left holding the reflector, and this is basically how we work there. And do you remember them, Behrouz? And for example, I remember we were just talking about how to bring individual narratives into the work, and like Aref chose water, and we were just basically using water to tell the story. Everybody used a different symbol, like from nature, to tell these stories. And for Behrouz, at first wanted an octopus to sit on his head, but the fishermen couldn't find an octopus, and we went with the fire.
I had a reason about that.
Yeah, you want to explain it?
What's the reason?
The reason is because I was seeing Australia as an octopus, and as a, that colonialism mentality that Australia has, that is actually controlling or, has a plan always or policy to take control of the Pacific islands. So, and as a country that export violence to those countries, so I was thinking about Australia, imagine Australia as an octopus. So that's why I wanted to use it, yeah.
Yeah, the fishermen, Robin, went searching for octopus, and they couldn't find any, so we had to go with the plan B, which was fire. I can go on about that story forever, but I don't know how much more you want to hear. This is very collaborative. Everybody was involved in the process of making, which was the beauty of our experience together. Like, we didn't want to capture the images as, like, often you see refugees behind bars and like a group of identical victims, basically. So we were chatting about how we can actually tell this story through nature, and nature was the prison there, basically. And so everybody chose different kind of elements, and we talked about different, metaphor and what metaphor means. And it was a process, but like, for example, for Emad, the sand or the soil was representing the land, which he was a stateless Kurdish refugee, and he said for Kurdish people, the land is the most precious thing in the world, and it's taken from us and I'm taken from it. So we used soil in different ways, and this is the picture that at the end worked out best. But we also made a film together, and that picture on the right was a different image of Behrouz that I made. I remember the first day through the conversations, you were reading a lot of the poems that you wrote on the island, and they were mind-blowing, all in Farsi, that you lost a lot of them, right? one was a love letter to your pillow. And because Behrouz was explaining to me that when you're a prisoner, you get really attached to every little thing that is around you. And if there's a glass in a corner and sitting there for ages and someone takes that glass away, you freak out by its absence. And you were telling me that how your pillow became your mother, your lover, your best friend, your comfort, everything. And that, I don't know if you still have that poem, but this image was, I made it in response to that poem. And we also made a film together, a 2-channel video installation. And yeah, that's another longer story. But it's, it was dedicated to the 12 men who died on Manus Island due to medical negligence and murder by the guards and unfortunately suicide cases. But it's like the men that we worked with told us the stories of the experiences there and their fear of dying on the island. So it's a combination of, you know, narrations, the stories, poetry, singing, and again, it was very collaborative and very performative too. And that's the end scene of the film. But this is a film of Behrouz. Do you want me to play his singing now? Behrouz sings. I want him to talk to you about that himself, but you said to me that singing saved you through the years of prison, right? Do you want to say a few words about it?
I think we can talk about it later.
After.
First,
all right. This is, I have to say, on the last day, I was going to the airport. We were in the car and I was very sad. And Behrouz's spirit was mind-blowing, and he was just like doing these performances at the back of the car, singing.
I should just give you some information. So we were in a cage in a prison. So we were 4 prisons in Manus Island, close to each other in a just same camp, same prison camp, but we couldn't see each other. We could see each other, but we couldn't go to another cage, you know. So we were there for 4.5 years. And after that, if you remember siege on 2017, they relocated us to another camp, but this time we became quite free on the island. So we were living like that for 1.5 years. So Hoda came on that time. That's why you see me on the car. So that's why we were in that place. Yeah, we were allowed to leave, but it was not safe. So just I had to share that.
And most of the refugees wouldn't leave because there were so many cases of stabbing and they were just traumatized. They didn't want to leave the camp.
Yeah, exactly. So the most of refugees couldn't leave the camp. They could go around the island, but they didn't. Yeah.
So this is Behrouz performing at the beginning in Farsi. He's telling me that imagine it's an orchestra and we have an entire orchestra sitting here and playing with me, and he's singing this famous Kurdish song.
Yeah. چینی جفتی چودیری چیکاره چینی لغس رو خیده کرم هاشاندینی کرمس رو خیده کرم هاشاندینی لیلی آی لیلی لیلی بانم اره دیریگن کربود چاوانم لیلی آی لیلی لیلی این دیگه چند نفر لیلی آی لیلی لیلی بانم اره دیریگن کربود چاوانم aman hey aman aman hey aman aman selaman çerhi çaylen çerhi çaylen zerva ilim şimam azizem marva ilim reyman zerva ilim şimam azizem marva ilim reyman.
I'd like you to say a little bit more about that song, Behrouz, but I think you've started to give us a bit of an answer as to why singing is so important, but also why everyday objects become so symbolically rich, like the pillow story and the cup maybe in other circumstances, especially when your world becomes shrunk, how everything gets compressed and your focus goes in, that inside that microscopic thing sometimes whole other worlds, how the old emotional relations start to get condensed. So I was wondering if you could tell us how the song and the other objects help you with your motivation to survive, to keep fighting, and then maybe let's build a little bridge from that experience, from those very tender moments and those angry moments as well, because a lot of us saw the angry in you because we read the articles in The Guardian, we read the articles in the Saturday paper, and we saw through your words the brutal and sadistic and dehumanizing attitudes of our own government, and which shocked us. Of course, it shocked us, but it didn't surprise us. But so we saw that hostile part of your experience, but very few of us understand perhaps the more tender part. Can you speak to that through the song, perhaps?
Yeah, first I should say I'm not an angry person at all.
No, not
Yeah,
you.
but politically I'm always angry. Yeah. So sometimes I wake up and by reading news I get so angry. But I think we can talk about this in different aspects. First is we should look at the whole system. So the whole system in Manus was designed to dehumanize detainees. And so that every day, every moment, detainees they have to really fight and struggle with that. And so even in your nightmares, so that system always is there. It is a system of control. And camera, you should live under camera all time. So of course you can live under camera for a day or for a week, but not for 6 years. And so when we have a system like this, and which is a very bureaucratic system as well in the same time, so for getting a simple thing like food, you have to stay in the line for a long time. When you want to see a doctor, you should go through a bureaucratic system. And in the end, you don't receive that. So when we have this system that's designed to dehumanize you, I think the best way to resist in front of that, to bring your dignity back, is to be creative. And that's why I think singing is very important in that context. It's not only singing. You can do writing, you can, I don't know, take care of flower, you can even connection with animals there is very important. And I've written about that, the connection with animals, with nature, with natural elements, and also people who have a sense of humor. You know, they create a space for others, for themselves, to just feel that you are a human being, you know. So I think that is very important. So we should look at all of this in that context. And of course, even love, you know, is important in that context. Poetry, performance, you know, some people were, you know, in my first book, there is a character called Maysam. So his name actually is Maysam the Whore. So Maysam the Whore is a character that he used to play with the system. So that's, I think, but we can talk about that, the whole system, that I say that that system in Manus Island is the original system, but that system we have it in this out of Manus as well. So we should see Manus beyond Manus, you know. Manus is just an original version of a system of control, but we have it here as well, you know. Yesterday I got angry in the airport.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. It's extreme, the system there, but it's not unique. And there are some continuities between the way in which control is exercised outside of that system and our everyday lives here. And so sometimes we think that you endured, and you did endure, something out of this world. But at the same time, in different ways, some elements of that world are also infiltrating and shaping our own world. And I think this is what your photography tried to do, in a sense, was to also demonstrate the resistance to that dehumanization and the desire for the subjects to claim some connection with either nature or fantasy and land or water that will also extend their individual agency as well, and their subjectivity, which was, of course, is what the system tries to both shrink, destroy, and eliminate.
Yeah, I have to add to that that like both Behrouz and I come from documentary background. He was a journalist and I was a documentary photographer in Iran. And during the 5 months of, you know, exchanging ideas, we did talk a lot about how even the language of documentary is an imperial language, and how we need to rethink that when it comes to telling the stories of refugees. There's very much, there are a lot of similarities in the way that Behrouz's book is written, and also the way that we approached making of the Remain, which is exactly what you referred to.
Yes, so it's not realism in the translucent, just straight reporting version of documentary. It's trying to keep in the document the element of creation as well. Because creation is where, as you suggest, Behrouz, is where our humanity comes from and searches to connect with. In that sense, tell us about the journey then from Manus to New Zealand. How did that happen, and how did you experience that transition, this departure from this state of surveillance into a new kind of existence?
Yeah, so before I answer that, I want to just share a little story about singing. I used to just go to a corner of the prison camp and sing into the ocean, just put my feet on the fences and sing. So I don't know that you have watched the movie Choco, Please Tell Us the Time, that I made on the phone with Arash Kamali Sarvestani, so before the book. So in that movie, I am singing and two local boys are behind the fences. And actually, I am singing Kurdish, but love quite sad song. And the local boys are dancing with my song, with my singing. And that is really incredible, that how music is a language that connects two local indigenous boys with a prisoner, you know, and that is really interesting. And I was singing, but I always imagine that people don't hear me because the prison was very small and I needed to sing, and I was just pretending that no one hear me, but actually people were hearing me. And after a while I forgot that people don't hear me. I thought that people don't hear me, so I'm not bothering them. And one day a local officer was walking beside me, and I was not singing on that time. Yeah, he was singing my song. Not in my language, just a melody. That was very interesting. So that the local officer who was just a part of, you know, like our jailer. So that was a connection between the detainee and a jailer, you know, through
You infiltrated
music. Yeah, that was very interesting, you know. So what was the question?
Who cares about the question? When Nelson Mandela was in jail, he thought to himself, how will I make a connection with my prison guards? And he listened to them, and he discovered that they all talked about rugby all the time. He was a boxer. So he decided to learn about rugby. And when he became president, he decided the most important thing to do was to host the World Cup in rugby. Now, my question was, you've moved to the world capital of rugby, to New Zealand. What is the life that you have experienced there like?
Yeah, I think you like rugby.
I do.
Yeah, I like football. I love football, so I play football, and so I didn't like New Zealand in this way because I love football. So, and that's why I hope that New Zealand reach to World Cup and achieve something in World Cup, because I believe that football is the only sport that that can change New Zealander taste or Australian taste of a sport. So, but
I
we
think they will
cannot
change
challenge
you
that.
before you change them.
Yeah, we should. The teams should achieve something to shake the whole country. So that is my connection with New Zealand, with rugby. But I watched their game with Ireland in the stadium, but they lost.
I know. They will come back, don't worry.
So
Come on,
But,
say
um,
about
but
the
but
experience.
rugby is very, I think my connection with New Zealand is mostly with the landscape and also through the indigenous side of New Zealand. So that is a very strong connection for me because of my background as a Kurdish. So that is my, if I find a connection with Australia, New Zealand is that mostly.
Yeah. But my point about Mandela was that he needed to find a bridge to connect with the people who were jailing him. And he found it through sport. You found it through song. But nevertheless, there was a recognition that both are human. And this is the interesting thing, because the jailer has to treat you like an object in order to be able to cope with the fact that he's doing something that's dehumanizing. But you cannot treat him like an object. If you want to survive, that is. You have to treat him like a human as well. So you have to build that bridge. And you built that bridge just like Mandela did through sport or song. And paradoxically, by him humming your song, he had to admit that you too were human, even though he was trained to treat you like an object. But this is in a sense, a follow-up question I want to now ask, because in that situation, Australian government, through excising the island where you arrived in Christmas Island and other parts of Australia from the territory so that people did not have rights to asylum, by treating people like objects, only referring to them as numbers and individuals, etc. There was an interesting connection perhaps to your own native political landscape of Kurdistan and Kurdish politics, because that's also a situation where disenfranchisement has occurred. The Kurdish people have been disenfranchised, just like the refugees were stripped of their identity. In your writing, you use the term coloniality to build a bridge between the Kurdish and the Australian context. Can you expand on ways in which this concept of coloniality is resonant for you to connect these different environments?
Yeah, I think that is the very important for me. So I left Iran so I grew up in Iran. I was born in Iran, and I grew up in a system which I call it a colonialism system, because our language, our culture, we are just marginalized in that system. So, and I grew up in that culture of resistance. So Kurdish people have been resisting and fighting for decades, and that created a resistance knowledge, and that resistance knowledge exists in our literature, our poetry, our art, or even our lifestyle. So that exists, which is a radical political culture. Because we have to, as a minority, as an ethnic minority or marginalized community, people, you must be radical. If you don't be radical, they assimilate you. So when I ended up in Australia and they sent me to that island, they banished me to that island. So that was already existing in me. So I borrowed that culture of resistance, that element, and reproduced it in Manus Island against another system, which was a liberal democracy system. That it was for the first time that I faced that system. And I think that was it was very important for me to understand the mentality of the system. But it was clear really for me. And that's why in my works, in that book especially, and the movie Chocopolis Tell Us the Time, it's mostly, the movie is about, mostly about the indigenous people in Manus Island, because they are the victim under this policy as well. So that's why I think, I think it's important, as a Kurdish, my background as a Kurd. And that was a connection between me and Hoda as well, because you should explain your relation with Kurdistan, Kurdish people.
Sure. My father was a Kurdish man, and but him and his family had to move to Tabriz, which is northwest of Iran, and then he had to deny his Kurdish identity because he was bullied at the school, and then they basically most Kurdish people experience extreme levels of racism, all forms of it in Iran. And but that was basically what connected me to Behrouz as well. And also I remember when I arrived, after a few days, you were like, you're definitely Kurdish. We were just working really hard and going around systems, and it was like, you're definitely Kurdish.
But I think you are Kurdish. You know why? Because I don't want to say that you are Kurdish. I mean, you have a connection. That nostalgia exists in you. So I see that in your work.
Thank you. Thanks. But I also remember that we talked about the Kurdish resistance movement, and for you, you didn't expect to come to the West and face the same systems. It was a shock at the beginning, and to realize, again, I have to fight this as well. And then, but you immediately could identify the similarities within the structure, and the way that you tried to challenge the Australian system from that perspective was what was really unique in your writing. And now it's interesting because the whole time that you were on Manus, you were just focused on fighting the Australian system against, refugees, and then you got really involved with the indigenous dialogue, and you tried to bring, the two together, which you did lots of writing that pointed out to the similarities of both systems. But as soon as you arrived in New Zealand, your focus shifted again to the fight for Kurdish people, Kurdish liberation, and you've been quite active in that scene as well.
Let me bring in another, because we are here in part to celebrate this wonderful new book, Freedom Only Freedom, which is the prison writings of Behrouz. And there's another very famous author of prison writing, not Antonio Gramsci, but Abdullah Öcalan, who was the leader of the Kurdish Workers' Party, still is, and he's been held in prison for over 20 years now in Turkey, in the Imrali prison on an island as well. And he's written several books, like yourself, and two very important concepts have been developed in his books. One is called democratic confederalism, and the other one is called genealogy, a book about feminism, which is about feminism. And so he argues that without sexual liberation, and the foundation of liberation is sexual, is feminist-led, but also the framework of liberation needs to be post-national, this confederal idea. So he has this cosmopolitan but local common sense of belonging. Now this brings into question, and I think this is not often understood, and we'll come to this in terms of the current crisis in Iran, but I want to start here with the role of women in the Kurdish resistance movement. Can you speak to that first?
Yeah, I think recently we had a conversation with Hoda, so I don't know if I'm allowed to say that or not, but she's considering to do some art about the slogan and the current protest in Iran and in Kurdistan, woman, life, freedom. Mm. So I should mention that this, so you mentioned Abdullah Öcalan. I think his work is, and his political view is very important, because he he is against nation state, and that's why he talk about that confederalism system, and he did it. His perspective, his political perspective, effect on Syria, in Rojava, in north of Syria, and they established a system. And this system is important because there is some elements. First is ecologism, that is caring about environment and connect with land and environment. That is important in his philosophy, and also women and equality. That is very important. This slogan, woman, life, freedom, has roots in Kurdistan resistance. And of course, Kurdish women have been leading and have been fighting for decades on. It's like a manifesto, and I think that is very important, that because in the West there is this mentality that this feminism movement only exists in West and belong to West, but that is very wrong, that is wrong perspective. And people think that feminism movement in the West is like a progressive than the feminism exists in other part of the world. But in Kurdistan, actually feminism movement has something important to offer to this world, and I think that is very important. With this slogan, woman, life, freedom, now in Kurdistan, that affect on Kurdish society as well, and also in Iran. So now is the manifesto for the movement in Iran.
Can I add something to what you were saying before we move forward? Because I think, in fact, the Kurdish feminist movement is very critical of the Western feminist movement. They challenge it as a capitalist version of, feminist resistance movement, and also they believe that the structures of it is from the foundation is colonial. And I started reading about it more recently, and I realized how they kind of believe in non-state confederal forms of even approach towards feminism, and also thinking about autonomous movements, smaller communities of women sharing, going back to folklore stories and nature. And also, like, when we talk about feminism in Kurdish feminist movement, it's quite incredible the way that they basically, genealogy speaks to the idea of the freedom of all humans is basically starts from the freedom of women.
Yes.
And it sets the foundation for fight against injustice within the heart of the feminist dialogue. And it's not women for women only, but it's women for all, and freedom of women equals the freedom of everybody. And so many, for example, I've seen dialogues on it that Öcalan is a man, and he defined this ideology and started it, and now there's like Kurdish resistance movement within, feminist armies are fighting, in war against ISIS with men. But like, that's exactly like the point, that even within the current feminist dialogue here, it's like criticized that why a man is involved in defining a feminist movement, which is basically what they kind of try to challenge, that the feminism in Kurdistan beliefs is just something that includes everybody, doesn't exclude. And what's quite fascinating about the female fighters, the warriors in YPG is the name of the group. They're listed with PKK as the terrorist organization. And, the women who actually were the only people who could fight ISIS in Rojava and Kobani are now listed as, a terrorist organization, because America doesn't want the locals, the Kurdish people, to fight ISIS. They want to use their own armies to fight them.
Yeah, and I think it's very important I mentioned that we shouldn't, or we cannot romanticize Kurdish feminism movement, or because it's still Kurdistan is a patriarchism culture and system, so that is
Öcalan embodies that.
We should always say that.
Yeah, he himself acknowledges those contradictions. I mean, he came to the idea of genealogy when his younger sister was arranged for was made to marry someone, an arranged marriage, and he was so shocked afterwards, because he's the elder brother, and then he came up with the phrase that no one can be free as long as there's housewifeization, like a woman is reduced to a housewife, and so everybody's freedom is compromised by a woman's compromises.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like what you and I were talking about, like this is, for example, in Iran, the current feminist revolution, or female-led revolution, we should say, is the first revolution that is happening that in there men are dying for women's freedom. And it's something that I don't think we've ever historically witnessed, and it's just basically, it's coming from the same, resistance movement that has been formed in the last 40 years. Is that right? YPG's been around for 40 years?
40 years.
Yeah, and now it's come to Iran, and 40.
No. Yeah, they just organized that in the Syrian war. Yeah. But for many decades,
Yeah, for decades it's been shaping and happening. And it's now just, which is something that Behrouz and I talked a lot about, that the world's reaction to what's happening in Iran has been a confused reaction. Like, people don't know if they can supported because women burning hijab seems to be, something Islamophobic, or it doesn't fit into the frameworks of the left. And so as Iranian people, we have been quite surprised for the lack of support for the movement. But in fact, what's happening there is not about, hijab, it's about the right to choose. And you see, if you watch the footage, what's happening in there, you see hijabis and non-hijabis fighting together for the liberation from a theocratic system. And that's something that within the feminist dialogue of Kurdistan is also challenged, that, you can be anti-imperial, but also be anti-theocratic systems. And for us, what Nikos and I were talking about the other day was the limitations of the current, dialogue between left and right that doesn't know how to navigate these complexities.
This is a very important topic, and we'll end the conversation here. So we're coming to a close now. But I think this is very fascinating, because on the one hand, we're seeing new forms of solidarity in Iran, but also new obstacles to solidarity in this so-called transnational, global left feminist movement, right? Because in the way in which cultural symbols were used as a step forward in the West is now being rejected as a cultural symbol, as a step forward in Iran. And also Iran hijacked the anti-imperialist ideology to cover over its own hierarchies, to cover over its own oppressions. And so now there's a confusion, as you say, in both places. But I want to get us to talk a little bit about this solidarity in Iran. The West's contradictions and confusions we can also tackle, but let's also address the new solidarity between men and women in terms of this right to choose. Because I find it very fascinating, because your sister was here 4 years ago. She's now in Iran, Sarah, and Sarah posts daily, almost, on Instagram and other social platforms, very, to me, very confrontational, very powerful, very political messages. And she's there. And I was struck by the courage, as well as the indignation, but also the courage to join and be part of a group to resist. And I always thought that this is something we should all do when we're facing totalitarians, whether it was Pussy Riot in being arrested in Moscow. We should all repeat the crime so that no one does the time. And in effect, people are doing that now, but still, people are being arrested as well. Yep. So it's not a complete defense, but it is a great attack as well, isn't it?
Yeah, this is quite incredible. Like, actually, last night, Behrouz and I were talking about it, that none of us even dared to talk about it publicly, about what we experienced there, or what the system is, or try to challenge it. For the first time ever, the fear is broken, and people inside and outside found the courage to speak about it. The choice was to stay and live under the oppression, or leave and migrate to other places. But now people are like all vocal about it. Everybody's posting, from celebrities to public figures to individuals, and they believe that if we're all in it together, they can arrest everybody. And so the silence is the violence, is what they believe in. And that's what my sister's doing, and it's just with every single post, everybody inside and outside are taking a risk, but seems to be the only way. Recently, like the celebrities that have been arrested individually for talking about it, now every time they arrest someone, 5 people, 10 people, actors, public figures, they go and take their hijabs off, and men and women stand and film themselves and share it on social media. But the other beautiful thing is about the unity in the country. Do you want to say a few words about it? That something that we've never witnessed before?
Yeah. So that the reason I use that word we shouldn't romanticize. So of course we shouldn't romanticize this protest as well, because we see it from outside that it is a movement is leading by women, and of course that is leading by women. It's very important, and of course people are fighting against that system very hard. They pay cost, and it's really incredible. But it's not only that picture that we see from outside. You know, inside Iran, this movement has different layers. You know, and one of the most important layer of this movement is ethnic minorities and the role of minorities in this movement against the whole system. You know, because among the opposition, there is, you know, they challenge each other, the political parties or people. So this unity that we are talking about, of course, is unity. Of course, that people of Iran, they haven't been united like this since the revolution on 1979. But still, I think it is just, yeah, it is just, it's like a tactic that they are united. If I go on Twitter now and say that in the post this system, if in the next system we want to write in our language, many people will attack me. That is not unity. They don't. They want to that we hide our identity, we deny our identity, and I don't want this unity, you know. So this unity that we talk about, it's it's challenging. It's not easy, you know.
But
We
again,
cannot
like,
say it very easily.
You're going into the history that is about, like, it cannot be challenged overnight. You know, we're talking about 100 years of oppression of Kurdish people, and at the moment what we're talking about is the beginning of a dialogue that needed to happen a long time ago, and there's now space for it to start and happen. And that's something that you admitted just minutes before the conversation too. It is hard. It's hard to, you know, be in your position, and I witness how you're attacked every day on Twitter for fighting for Kurdish people and their rights and history, but we never even had this opportunity to have these conversations before.
Of course, that the dialogue has started, so that is very important. Many people, many Persian people, that they have started to understand what the minorities say, what they want. So, of course, that is an achievement, you know. But still, I think we pretend that we are united, you know. We are united,
united
but
against
in the same
system.
time, we pretend. I don't pretend because I yell at, you know. But many people, the media, mainstream media, they pretend that we are united. We are not united. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting angry.
You said you weren't an angry man, but you are certainly impatient, and I admire you for both, because I mean, this is to come back to John. All his life, he was so stunned by our backward steps, or our little steps forwards, and our incomplete steps sideways, and so on. So there was, as you say, there is a dialogue that, as Hoda has pointed out, is necessary, and it is a small achievement. But as you also wish, is that this little step would lead to a somersault, where everything would flip. And as you know, there are layers and layers and layers. And Behrouz has asked me to end today by reading a passage from his new book. So with the liberty that you've given me, I will read this very short piece that was written on Manus Island and is called Untitled. Here in the neighborhood of the people who stare for 24 hours solely at walls and metal, the presence of animals is a virtue. That flock of birds gliding at night under the dramatic moon creates a magical and striking scene in our minds. So too the orchestra of frogs that have no home except a lagoon that clings to the ocean. Shunning the ocean as they grow old, the eldest crabs sink into the damp mud under the fences, and after a while drift into a deep sleep. Slithering under the fences, curious snakes sometimes enter the prison like strangers and usually lose their lives for their innocent trespass. When the unique fish-eating eagle with a white neck dives into the ocean bed, it catches a big fish. Colourful parrots love to hold their family, gathering on the tallest coconut trees. Here, animals are the finest elements in the mind of a lonely prisoner who has no interests but the sky, the ocean, and the jungle, all beyond the fences. Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Hoda and Behrouz.
Thank you very much.
There's one more.
Yeah, I should just mention that book edited and translated by Omid Tawfiqian and Manus Island. So they are not here today, but they have done a great job to do that, and they have been working with me for many years. So I should just acknowledge that. Yeah.
Every book needs a village. I think.
Well, I could have had that going on all evening, but unfortunately, time does beat us. I did lie to you two. You can't leave. You've got to keep going, all right? And you have to nominate next year's speaker. Now, we can talk about that. We just, from our point of view, a really big thank you from the Greek community. You're welcome here anytime. We'll be following your careers with great interest, and keep up the fight. We've got some small gifts for you, a small token of our appreciation.
Did you understand all my brother's questions? He said they weren't questions. He wrote another book while he was talking to you, you know? Oh, yeah. It was a book series with my brother. Like you.